There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a man realizes he doesn't need to win. It doesn't come during the heat of the argument, not when the blood is up, the voice raised, the eyes sharpened. No, it comes later, maybe in a car alone, or at a kitchen sink with the water running, or walking beneath a quiet sky long after the noise has settled. That's when it hits you. You didn't need to say a thing. You didn't need to raise your voice. You didn't need to prove anything. You only needed to remain unmoved. A few years ago, a man named Kyle, a senior project manager at a fast-growing tech firm in Austin, found himself in one of those meetings where everything feels like it's going sideways. A younger colleague, ambitious and sharp-tongued, challenged him in front of the entire room, called his judgment outdated, questioned his decisions. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a direct hit. The kind that makes other people glance down at their notes or pretend to read their laptops. Kyle didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even change his tone. He simply listened. And when the room went quiet and all eyes waited for a rebuttal, he just nodded once, closed his notebook and said, "Let's move on." 2 days later, that same colleague approached Kyle privately, apologized, said he'd been out of line, said he didn't expect him to take it with that kind of calm, that kind of power. Kyle smiled and said, "I don't argue to be right. I listen to understand." That, my friend, is Stoic philosophy in motion. That is the power of a man who doesn't need to speak to win, and maybe, just maybe, that's what we've forgotten. Because in the world we live in, with its comment wars, its shouting matches, its endless need to be louder, faster, wittier, silence feels like defeat. We think if we don't respond, we lose. If we don't react, we're weak. If we don't fight back, we'll be walked over. But the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they knew the truth. And that truth is this: victory is not always declared out loud. Sometimes it's felt in the quiet strength of a man who doesn't break. Have you ever been in an argument that left you hollow afterward? Even if you won, did you feel calm? Did it actually solve anything? Or did it just feed the beast of ego just for a moment? What if the strongest response was no response at all? It sounds counterintuitive, but stay with me, because the ancient Stoics mastered this art, and if you let them, they'll teach you too. Let me take you to a memory, a childhood scene. A father and son sit at a dinner table. The boy is young, maybe 8, full of fire, full of questions. He slams his fists, protests his chores, argues over what's fair. The father doesn't shout, doesn't raise a hand. He chews slowly, then says, "You can talk as loud as you want, son." But real strength isn't noisy. That boy remembers it his whole life. And years later, when he's the one being shouted at, belittled in a courtroom, laughed at in a bar, or dismissed in a boardroom, he remembers. And he stays silent, not out of fear, but because he knows the power of presence. What if silence wasn't surrender, but a form of dominance? What if calm was the loudest language of all? You see, we've confused reaction with relevance. We think the louder voice wins. But the Stoic understands the man who needs to be loud is usually the one who's already lost control. Picture Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, dealing with betrayals, invasions, plagues, and politics. Do you think he shouted across tables, demanded allegiance through volume? No. His meditations were written in solitude, often during war. He ruled by example, not ego. He knew that leadership, true leadership, comes from inner clarity, not outer clamor. And we, modern men, need that more than ever. In our families, in our workspaces, in our friendships, we are constantly pulled to react, to match energy, to clap back. But imagine this: someone insults you at a dinner party. You feel the fire rise. You want to respond, cut them down, but instead, you breathe. You sip your drink. You smile, you say, "Interesting perspective," and move on. Later, people will remember not the insult, but your poise. They'll say, "I don't know how you stayed so composed." And you'll know, because you've trained for this. Because Stoicism is not a theory. It's a discipline. Like a soldier sharpens his sword, you've sharpened your soul. But don't mistake silence for passivity. The Stoic is not weak. He simply knows where his energy belongs and where it's wasted. Can you feel the difference between reacting to prove and responding to protect your peace? One is ego, the other is power. I once met a man named David, former Marine, now a jiu-jitsu instructor. He told me the most dangerous fighters are often the quietest men in the room. You talk a lot when you're trying to convince yourself you're safe, he said. But when you know what you're capable of, you don't need to announce it. The Stoic is like that, calm because he's certain, silent because he's prepared, detached from drama, not because he doesn't care, but because he values clarity over chaos. And in arguments, that clarity is gold. Let's look at what's really going on when someone lashes out, when someone insults you, criticizes you unfairly, or challenges your integrity in front of others. Most of the time, it's not about you. It's about their fear, their insecurity, their need to feel in control. When you react emotionally, you validate their tactic. You give them what they want, a tug of war. But when you remain centered, you break the game. They throw the rope. You don't pick it up. They expect fire. You give them ice. That's when power shifts. Imagine being so grounded, so internally still, that no one can drag you into their storm. What would your life look like if nothing could steal your peace? The first time you stay silent, when every cell in your body is screaming to speak, it's terrifying. You feel the urge clawing at your throat, your fists tightening, your heart racing like a war drum. You want to justify yourself. You want to explain. You want to be understood. But then you remember, being understood is not the highest virtue. Being at peace is. You sit back. You let them talk. You let the storm swirl around you, and you realize something strange. Their words start to lose power. Their energy fizzles out, like a flame that dies because it couldn't find oxygen. That is the moment you begin to understand what the Stoics meant by apatheia. Not apathy in the modern sense, but a calm detachment from destructive emotion. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've trained yourself to care about the right things. Your character, your composure, your clarity, more than about winning some verbal tug of war. Because if you win an argument by losing your peace, was it really a victory? Now think about the men who've left a deep impression on you. The ones who walk into a room and command it without a word. The ones whose presence quiets noise instead of adding to it. It's not because they dominate others. It's because they dominate themselves. That's what Stoic philosophy teaches. Not to control the world, but to control yourself within it. Not to silence others, but to become so still that their noise cannot enter you. And in that silence, something miraculous happens. People begin to listen more closely, not to your words, but to your energy. Your calm becomes contagious. Your restraint becomes an unspoken standard. You raise the temperature of the room just by not reacting. Like the still surface of a deep lake, calm yet profound, you show others what true power looks like. How different would your life be if you stopped trying to win and started trying to remain whole? There's a man I met at a leadership retreat in Colorado. Late 40s, shaved head, sharp mind. He'd been a corporate executive for 2 decades before stepping away to care for his wife during her illness. He told me, "I used to win every argument in the boardroom. I was sharp, quick. I always had the last word, but none of it helped me when I had to sit silently next to my wife while she suffered. That's when I learned what real presence means. Being strong enough to stay when there's nothing left to say." That stayed with me. You see, the real battle is not between you and others. It's between your ego and your essence. Your pride wants to shout. Your essence wants to breathe. And whichever one you feed wins. You may not always be able to control your circumstances, but you can always control your response. And often the most powerful response is no response at all. That doesn't mean letting others walk over you. It means knowing the difference between battles that build your soul and battles that merely bruise your ego. Think about the last conflict you were in. A partner, a sibling, a coworker. Now ask yourself, were you trying to bring clarity or were you trying to be right? And what did that cost you? The Stoic understands. Every word spoken in anger is a word you cannot take back. Every emotional reaction is a crack in the armor. So instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of defending, they discern. They choose to respond only when it brings peace, not when it proves superiority. And in this world of endless noise, that kind of restraint feels revolutionary. You become like a mountain in a thunderstorm. The wind howls, the lightning flashes, but you remain unmoved. You are not indifferent. You are anchored. When others rage, you reflect. When they accuse, you assess. When they escalate, you exhale. And that terrifies them because they can't pull you into their chaos. They don't know how to fight someone who won't fight back. That's the Stoic advantage. That's how you win without saying a word. Have you ever seen a man walk away from an argument, not because he's weak, but because he knows what's beneath him? There's a nobility in that, a quiet defiance. It says, I do not belong in this fire. I do not waste arrows on shadows. There's a scene I'll never forget. It happened at a New York subway platform. Two men were yelling at each other, pushing, swearing, escalating fast. Right next to them stood an older man in a brown coat, mid-60s, steel gray hair, unmoved. One of the fighters turned to him and screamed, "What are you looking at?" The older man replied gently, "Just a reminder." A reminder of what? Of who I used to be before I learned to stop giving away my peace. And he turned, stepped into the train, and disappeared. What if every argument was really a test? Not of your wit, but of your inner discipline. Each time someone tries to pull you into conflict, they're really asking, are you master of yourself? Or are you mine? The Stoic answers by simply not answering. But don't mistake this for coldness. It takes great warmth to stay silent when you care. It takes love for yourself and for others to choose stillness over superiority. Because behind every desire to argue is a deeper desire to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. And when you realize you don't need anyone else's validation to feel those things, you stop chasing arguments. You start cultivating peace. You become a man who no longer needs to prove he's powerful. He simply is. And that changes everything. You stop wasting energy trying to convince people who have already made up their minds. You stop reacting to bait. You stop lowering yourself to win the approval of people whose opinions you wouldn't trust with your future. Instead, you carry yourself with quiet authority. You speak only when it improves the silence. You respond only when it restores dignity to yourself and to the moment. You walk through life like a storm with no sound, and people notice. In relationships, your partner begins to trust you more, not because you always have the perfect response, but because you don't escalate. You don't play emotional ping pong. You listen, you absorb, you act with intention. That builds safety. In business, your colleagues recognize that when tension rises, you lower your voice instead of raising it. You don't dominate rooms with volume, you lead with calm. That builds respect. And most importantly, in your own soul, you stop being torn in 1,000 directions by every opinion, every insult, every challenge. You become sovereign, whole. Tell me, how many arguments in your life actually made you feel more connected, more fulfilled, more free? Now imagine a life where your peace is untouchable, where your presence speaks louder than your defense, where you walk away not out of fear, but out of principle. That life begins with one small choice. The next time someone provokes you, pause, breathe, smile maybe. Then ask yourself, is this worth disturbing my stillness? If the answer is no, walk away. Not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in full awareness of your power, because the man who doesn't need to win the argument already has. When you begin living this way, not reacting, not engaging in every verbal battle, some people will misunderstand you. They'll think you're cold. They'll say you're distant, hard to read, emotionally unavailable. They'll assume you don't care. Let them, because the truth is, you're not cold. You've just stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You're not distant, you're disciplined. You're not emotionally unavailable. You're emotionally unshakable. There's a quiet revolution happening inside you. It doesn't make noise, but it changes everything. You wake up with a different kind of focus. You no longer need to prove yourself to people who can't see your value. You're no longer baited into drama. You realize the more you grow, the less you argue. And the more you understand yourself, the less you need others to. You start to see conflict for what it is, a mirror. It reveals the wounds people carry, the control they seek, the fear that speaks through their raised voices. And instead of reacting, you start watching with a kind of detached compassion. It's not your job to fix people. It's your job to remain rooted. Think of the last time someone came at you with anger. Maybe they insulted you. Maybe they accused you unfairly. Maybe they brought up your past, tried to pull you back into an identity you've outgrown. The old you would have snapped, fought back, matched fire with fire, but now you just breathe. You remember who you are. You remind yourself that nothing anyone says can take away what you've built within. Your mind is a fortress now. Your heart is not a battlefield anymore. And no, you won't fight today. Have you ever noticed that when a fire doesn't find fuel, it dies quickly? That's what your silence does. It suffocates unnecessary drama. It leaves no room for ego games. It takes all the wind out of their sails, not by domination, but by non-resistance. And ironically, that's when people start respecting you more. Because in a world where everyone's addicted to noise, your stillness feels sacred. You become the eye of the storm, the one place that stays calm while everything else spins. And there, in that calm, you have clarity. You start to see what arguments are really about. Most of the time, they're not about the issue. They're about control, about who gets the last word, about pride. And that's where the Stoic mindset cuts through the fog. A Stoic asks, is this in my control? If the answer is no, the weather, someone else's opinion, their tone, their anger, then it's beneath his concern. You cannot control what another person says, but you can always control your energy in their presence. That's your arena. That's where you win. There was a man I coached last year, Jack, 42, ex-sales director, going through a rough divorce. His ex-wife would send long, scathing messages, picking at every flaw, trying to provoke him. For months, he took the bait, replying, defending, matching her tone. It was destroying his peace. Then he made a shift. He started replying with one sentence: I acknowledge your concerns and will respond when appropriate. No emotion, no attack, just calm. She escalated. He stayed neutral. And then one day, the messages stopped. He said to me, it's like I took away her power to control the moment. And I told him, no, you just finally reclaimed yours. You see, when you stop being reactive, you become magnetic. People are drawn to your calm. They feel safer around you, not because you're passive, but because you're powerful without being threatening. And the beauty of it is this: the more silent you become in conflict, the more you start to hear, not just others, but yourself. You start hearing your own intuition. You start recognizing when an argument is about them, not you. You start seeing when silence can be an act of compassion, not just self-preservation. What if silence wasn't just a weapon, but a medicine? What if by saying less you healed more of yourself and of the moment? The Stoics knew this deeply. Seneca wrote, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. I would add, sometimes even to stay quiet is an act of strength. You don't need to always have the last word. You don't need to educate everyone who disagrees with you. You don't need to win them over. You need to preserve your inner sanctuary, that space inside you that no insult can touch, no conflict can stain, no argument can occupy unless you let it in. How much would your life change if you started living from that place? Let me tell you what happens when you do. You begin to smile more, not because life gets easier, but because you stop inviting unnecessary stress. You sleep better, not because the world gets quieter, but because your mind finally does. You move through difficult conversations without carrying the emotional residue. You lose fewer battles with your temper. You stop explaining your worth. You simply live it. And people notice. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it. They watch the way you carry yourself, the way you don't flinch when criticized, the way you don't crumble when challenged, the way you pause before speaking, and sometimes choose not to speak at all. It's not silence from weakness, it's silence from wisdom. It's knowing that sometimes the best way to defend your dignity is to not put it on trial in the first place. You're not here to win arguments. You're here to live with integrity. So when they come at you with blame, with mockery, with provocation, you'll feel the old urges rise. But then you'll feel something stronger underneath them. Your training. That's what Stoicism is. Not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. Not the denial of conflict, but the transcendence of it. Not running away from difficult conversations, but showing up to them with so much inner power that you no longer need to conquer them. You simply outlast them. Have you ever stood in front of someone screaming at you and realized they were only screaming because they were afraid of your calm? That's when you know you've stepped into a different level of being, one where you don't need to win because nothing outside you can make you lose. One where silence is not retreat. It's your most deliberate move. And from that place, arguments don't end with you having the last word. They end with you having the final presence. The kind that stays with people long after the noise fades. The kind that teaches not through speech, but by stillness. The kind that echoes in memory, not for what you said, but for what you didn't need to. And isn't that the most powerful kind of communication there is? There's something almost coward about a man who listens fully and responds slowly. Not because he's slow-witted, but because he's mastered the space between stimulus and response. In that space lies his freedom, the freedom to remain himself regardless of what anyone throws at him. And most people live like matches. One spark, a rude comment, a dismissive glance, a sarcastic tone, and they're on fire, burning, reacting, consuming everything around them until all that's left is smoke. But the Stoic man lives like stone. Sparks bounce off, heat rises, then fades. He doesn't burn. He absorbs, he watches, he waits. And in that patience, he sees clearly what others miss in the fog of their emotions. I once watched a father in a grocery store, his toddler screaming, kicking, throwing snacks off the shelf. The mother looked around embarrassed. The father just knelt, calmly gathered the snacks, gently held his son's arms and said softly, "I'm right here. You can scream, but it won't change anything. I'll be right here until you're done." No scolding, no threats, just presence. That child stopped after 30 seconds, not because he was forced to, but because he realized his tantrum had nowhere to land. He couldn't shake his father, and something in that gave him peace. That's how Stoicism works. Not by suppressing others, but by outlasting their storms. It's why the strongest men don't react, they reflect. They listen beneath the words, watching for the wound behind the insult, because every insult is a signal, a flare shot into the sky that says, "I don't feel safe." The Stoic doesn't shame that. He doesn't feed it either. He simply stays rooted, like a tall tree in the wind, creaking maybe, but never cracking. But don't be fooled. This stillness is forged, not gifted. It's born from failure, pain, humiliation, from the times we did react, the arguments that left us empty, the words we can't take back. the doors we slammed, the silence we gave for the wrong reasons. Every calm man you admire, he didn't get there by luck. He earned it in the fire. He learned over time to choose peace over pride. He trained himself to stay still when he used to swing, to observe when he used to interrupt, to pause when he used to pounce. That's Stoicism. Not pretending you're above emotion, but practicing control until control becomes second nature. Can you imagine who you'd become if you mastered that? Not just in arguments, but in life? You'd walk differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. You'd speak differently. Fewer words, more weight. You'd love differently. Not through control, but through presence. You'd stop debating people who have no interest in truth, only in winning. You'd stop defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You'd stop explaining your worth in rooms that haven't earned your voice. You'd begin to live like a man who doesn't just know peace, he embodies it. And you'd become unforgettable. You wouldn't need to impress anymore. You'd stop rehearsing the perfect comeback. Stop replaying old conversations in your head. Your silence would become your signature. Your unshakable confidence would become your armor. People would come to you not for answers, but for grounding. In your presence, they'd slow down, lower their voices, check their egos, because your stillness would remind them of what they've lost in the noise. That's the paradox of Stoic strength. The less you fight, the more you influence. The quieter you become, the deeper your words echo. And yes, sometimes people will mistake your silence for weakness. Let them underestimate you. Let them write you off. Because nothing confuses an unbalanced person more than someone who refuses to play their game. They'll keep trying to provoke you, keep testing your boundaries. But every time you respond with poise instead of panic, you teach them a new standard. You show them what self-respect looks like in real time. And slowly, your silence becomes contagious. People begin to think before they speak around you. They begin to raise their standards just to be near your presence. You don't have to ask for respect anymore. You are respect. Isn't that more powerful than any comeback? And still, you're human. There will be moments when the pressure is too much, when the old habits return, when you want to yell or argue or crush someone with your intellect. But then you'll remember what matters more, your peace, your growth, your clarity. Because no argument is worth losing yourself, no debate is worth disturbing your spirit, and no opinion is worth more than your own stillness. So you'll walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you've won the only battle that ever mattered, the one inside. I remember an old carpenter I met once in a small town in Maine. He was retired in his 70s, spoke little, moved slow, but when he did speak, everyone listened. One day, I asked him why he was so quiet. He said, "When I was young, I thought people listened to loud men. Now I know they remember the quiet ones." That hit me in the chest, because it's true. We don't remember the men who shouted us down. We remember the ones who stood firm when everything was shaking, the ones who didn't flinch when insulted, who stayed true when it would have been easier to react, who walked away with dignity when others begged for a fight. We remember them because they remind us of who we could be. What if you became that kind of man? The kind who doesn't just study Stoic philosophy, but lives it, breathes it, walks it into every room. What if your next argument wasn't something you survived, but something that revealed how far you've come? The next time someone says something cruel, what if you smiled, not out of smugness, but out of sovereignty? What if you let them have the last word and kept the last laugh? Not because you're better, but because you're free. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't yell in people's faces or fight for the spotlight. It's calm, it's subtle, it's felt, not heard. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never trade it for another petty debate again. The Stoics taught us, control yourself and you control the world. So let others argue, let them prove, let them posture, let them bark. You'll be too busy mastering the one battle that actually matters. The one between your pride and your peace. And in that battle, you don't need to say a word to win. There's a strange shift that happens when you truly stop needing to win. You no longer hear insults the same way. What used to feel like an attack now sounds like static, a bad connection from someone who hasn't tuned into their own frequency yet. You start to see how many people aren't actually arguing with you. They're arguing with their father who wasn't there, their ex who broke them, the boss who made them feel small. You just happen to be standing in the line of fire, and that's where your power deepens. Because now you see clearly. You stop taking things personally. You stop internalizing every jab. You start to recognize that most anger, most conflict, most drama has almost nothing to do with you. So you detach, not in a cold, avoidant way, but in a wise, compassionate way. You don't need to fight because you're not in the fight. You're just a witness now, present, alert, but unshaken. This is where your stillness becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to others. Because every time you stay calm in the face of chaos, you offer people a new way of being. You become the mirror that reflects what they're capable of if they drop their defenses. You model maturity without ever using the word. And eventually, people shift. Not all of them, not right away, but they feel your energy, your centeredness, your refusal to collapse into chaos. And it leaves a mark. I remember a woman once said to her partner in a counseling session, "When I scream, you don't yell back. That used to make me furious. Now it makes me feel safe." It's not about silence as punishment. It's about silence as sanctuary. And that's a rare thing in this world. To meet someone who doesn't escalate, doesn't mirror your worst, doesn't use every conversation as a courtroom. People hunger for that. Even if they don't say it, they feel it. And the deeper you go in your Stoic practice, the more you become that sanctuary. Your body relaxes in conversations where others tense up. Your tone stays steady in moments that used to make you snap. You become less reactive, more reflective. You listen longer. You interrupt less. You choose your words not to be clever, but to be kind. That doesn't mean you become a doormat. It means you pick your battles with the wisdom of a seasoned warrior. Someone who knows that most fights aren't worth the bruise to your soul. The Stoic doesn't refuse to fight out of fear. He refuses because he knows his worth isn't up for debate. And when someone really crosses the line, not a petty disagreement, but a true violation, the Stoic doesn't argue. He acts. He exits. He enforces boundaries not with lectures or ultimatums, but with movement, with silence that speaks louder than any demand. Because silence, when rooted in truth, carries weight. Have you ever had someone walk away from you? Not out of bitterness, but out of deep self-respect? You feel that echo, don't you? That final punctuation of presence. That's what the Stoic teaches us. You don't need to win the moment. You only need to win yourself. The man who walks away from drama isn't weak. He's just not interested in bleeding for people who aren't willing to stop cutting. And here's the strange twist. When you no longer need to win, you start to win more than ever before. You gain influence not because you overpower, but because people trust your calm. You gain clarity because your energy isn't spent on defending a fragile ego. You gain respect because people admire the one who doesn't flinch, doesn't crack, doesn't tumble and collapse. You become a lighthouse in a world full of blinking, burning lights, constantly reacting, constantly seeking attention. And you just shine, steady, silent, secure. There's a story that stuck with me from a man who once lost everything in a single day. His name was Chris, mid-50s, owned a company, had a family, a house, a reputation. Then came a scandal, one he didn't even cause. But the internet didn't care. He was painted as the villain. Everyone was screaming, accusing, demanding a response. And for 2 weeks, he said nothing. No tweet, no press conference, no counterattack. Just silence. Then one day, a journalist caught him outside his office and said, "Aren't you angry? Don't you want to defend yourself?" Chris looked at him and said, If I give them my peace, what do I have left? That's the level of detachment Stoicism teaches, that even when your world is burning, you keep your flame inside protected, untouched. Because if your fire depends on the world staying kind, you'll burn out. But if your fire is internal, untouchable, rooted in virtue, no scandal, no lie, no opinion can dim it. This is why Stoic silence is not absence, it's presence. Full presence. You're there, you're listening, you're weighing every word, you're responding only when it nourishes the moment. And when it doesn't, you stay still. Because sometimes stillness is the most powerful sound in the room. How many men do you know who have this kind of energy? Not flashy, not domineering, but calm, precise, measured. Men who you want to follow not because they shout commands, but because their very presence says, I am unshaken. I don't react. I don't perform. I simply am. That's the kind of man you can become, but you must choose it over and over in the heat the moment. When your pride is on the line, when your reputation is being tested, when your patience is wearing thin. That's when Stoicism isn't a philosophy, it's a practice. A lived moment-by-moment decision to say, I will not let this moment define me. I will not meet fire with fire. I will let this pass through me and remain. This is your invitation, not to become passive, but to become powerful in a different way. To speak less, but say more. To defend less, but live with more dignity. To fight less, but stand stronger. Because in a world obsessed with reaction, your restraint is revolution, and it starts with one decision. The next time conflict comes knocking, don't open the door. Breathe, remember who you are, and if you choose to speak, speak from stillness. And if you choose silence, let it be a silence so complete, so centered, so calm, that no one dares mistake it for surrender. They'll feel it, even if you say nothing, especially if you say nothing. And then came a moment that would etch itself into James's memory like a scar, quiet, painful, unforgettable. His younger brother Eric lost his job. He was devastated, angry, blaming everyone but himself. When he showed up at James' apartment that night, half drunk and desperate for validation, James didn't say much, he just listened. And Eric, he took that silence as judgment. You think you're better than me, don't you? Eric snapped, standing over him, fists clenched, eyes wide with fury. You with your calm face, your little routines, always so composed. You never say anything. You think that makes you strong. James didn't respond. He simply stood, looked his brother in the eye, and said one sentence. You're hurting, but I'm not your enemy. That was it. No lecture, no attempt to win the argument. He left the room, made tea, and returned without a trace of emotional residue. Eric broke down in silence. And for the first time, he allowed James to hold space for his pain. Because here's the paradox. In a world addicted to noise, stillness becomes thunder. In a world obsessed with reaction, non-reaction becomes a revolution. The Stoic doesn't need to dominate the room with words. He wins through presence. Not the kind of presence that overpowers, but the kind that grounds. That reminds everyone around him of a higher standard, of dignity, clarity, and peace. And when you embody that standard long enough, people stop trying to argue with you, not because they fear you, but because something in your calmness disarms their chaos. Even in a courtroom, the most powerful lawyer isn't always the one who yells the loudest. It's the one who waits, who lets the other side lose composure, who strikes with precision after listening fully. That lawyer doesn't win by force. He wins by restraint. Think of Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, yet his journal, Meditations, reads like a private conversation with his own flaws. He didn't crush enemies with brute declarations. He dismantled them within himself before they even had a chance to provoke him. And that's where the real battle lies. Because no argument can be truly won externally until the internal war is over. The war against ego, the war against needing to be right, the war against the impulse to defend every misunderstanding, every mischaracterization, every slight. That's the Stoic way, to let go of victory and embrace virtue. Let them say what they want. Let them throw stones of doubt and anger. If you are anchored, nothing they say can shake you. There is a quiet power in not responding, not as an act of weakness, but as a declaration of freedom. You are no longer a puppet pulled by the strings of emotion. You are a mountain unmoved by wind. Ever been in a meeting where one person keeps talking, trying to win with volume and passion, and another just waits, arms folded, listening carefully? That quiet figure often leaves the deepest impression. Why? Because restraint suggests depth, silence hints at mastery, and the modern world is starving for people who don't need to constantly assert themselves. The Stoic wins without speaking, because he's not playing the same game. He's not trying to impress. He's not playing defense. He's simply being. Have you noticed that in the deepest forests, it's the stillest creatures that command attention? The deer doesn't need to roar. The eagle doesn't flap incessantly. They wait, they observe, and when the moment is right, they act with elegance. That's what the Stoic does. He waits until action is truly needed. Then he moves decisively. But if not, he lets the waves crash and simply stands on the shore. There's power in not replying to provocation, in letting the insult pass through you like wind through branches, in choosing the long game over the short clash. And James, he started living like that in all areas of life, not just in arguments. When his business partner made a bad decision that cost them money, James didn't erupt. He made notes. He asked questions a week later when clarity had returned. When his girlfriend criticized his emotional distance, he didn't argue or defend. He sat with her, asked what she truly needed, and stayed silent long enough to hear what words couldn't say. It's not that he became passive. No, he became deliberate. And that's the shift Stoicism offers. From reaction to intention, from control to calm authority. Because in truth, most arguments are just fear dressed up in louder clothes. Fear of not being seen, fear of losing control, fear of not mattering. But the Stoic has already faced that fear and walked through it. He knows his worth doesn't rise or fall with every opinion hurled his way. He knows that calmness doesn't mean apathy, it means having nothing to prove. And in that space, he begins to win, not by defeating others, but by disarming their need to fight. He becomes an oasis in a desert of ego, a lighthouse in a sea of noise. Imagine this, you're at a family dinner. Politics come up, voices rise, old resentments surface. Everyone wants to be heard. You take a breath, you smile, you pass the salt, you change the subject without force. Later, someone pulls you aside and says, "Thank you. You kept the peace tonight. You didn't win the argument, you ended it before it began." That's what the Stoic does. And it's not easy. It takes practice, patience, self-observation. It means pausing before reacting, asking, is this worth my energy? Am I speaking from clarity or from the desire to be seen as right? Sometimes silence speaks louder than all the wisdom you could throw into a room, but to wield that silence, you must first befriend it. And that's the journey, not to conquer others, but to conquer the self, to choose calm in chaos, stillness in storms, and eventually you'll see what James saw, that when you stop trying to win arguments, you start winning respect, not from everyone, but from the right ones. And more importantly, from yourself. That's the quiet victory the Stoics knew, and it's waiting for you too. So the next time you find yourself on the edge of an argument, try something different. Don't raise your voice, don't scramble to prove a point. Just breathe, step back, hold the silence. Let your stillness speak louder than your words ever could. And if this idea speaks to something deeper in you, something you've always known but perhaps forgotten, then maybe it's time to make this more than a passing insight. Start small. Apply one principle from Stoic philosophy this week. Maybe it's delaying your reaction. Maybe it's walking away from drama without apology. Maybe it's journaling your emotions before expressing them. Whatever it is, do it deliberately. Live it. Don't just admire the Stoics, become one, because in a world that rewards noise, your quiet strength might just be the most powerful message of all.